we who are strong, okay, but who are the strong? And we talked about this last week because this is how chapter 14 began also, it's talking about the strong in the faith and the weak. And my own opinion is that the strong are those who are well established in the faith, have confidence, they understand God's commandments, they understand how to live it. They understand especially where the boundaries are between sin and not sin, clean and unclean. They're able to navigate those questions without a lot of self-doubt. Sometimes the one who believes that he is stronger really isn't. He doesn't understand what he thinks he does. So we always have to recognize that that's a possibility. No matter how much we know and think we understand, we can still be wrong. So that's one of the big reasons that we have to give each other some space. Let people develop on their own. Let them study the scriptures, encourage, teach, correct when necessary, but don't force people to move beyond what their conscience will allow, because you're only going to do them harm. So this is the difference really between the strong and the weak. When it says we who are strong have an obligation to bear with the failings of the weak, does anybody have a different idea of what that might mean?
So the Torah is a handbook, right? And it's designed to obviously be obeyed and not be transgressed. But that is like base level thinking. That's why I get frustrated when people are arguing the Torah, because I'm like, dude, that's not even nothing. I want to be special forces where God just like sends me somewhere and to crush. And I need to be, thinking the way he would think, considering the way he would consider, and letting him guide me with his eye. His eye, of course, being the Spirit, right?
Mm-hmm.
In our conviction, and that we would have a sense. So like if you're walking through the market and you're like, well, Torah says I can eat this. Well, the guy next to you who has a weak point and really struggles with something is relying on you to be a mentor and stuff. So are you going to put your belly over your friend, right? And so you would say, you know what, I could eat that, or I could have that shot of extremely delicious aged whiskey, but my friend's an alcoholic and he really has a hard time with it. So if he comes over, I'm hiding all the bottles. So that's kind of where I go, is like, yeah, you can have a drink or you can have some meat, but if you're with people that are weak and are struggling with something, you want to have the love of your neighbor, the love of your brother, way ahead of your own personal stuff, and then Yahweh's going to take care of you one way or the other. That's in my mind kind of where I go there.
Yeah, that's a good perspective. Go ahead and read it, Leviticus 10:9-11 when you're ready.
Do not drink wine or intoxicating drink, you nor your sons with you, when you go into the tabernacle of meeting, lest you die. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations, that you may distinguish between holy and unholy, between clean and unclean, and that you may teach the children of Israel all the statutes which the Lord has spoken to them by the hand of Moses.
It's not just that the strong have an obligation to bear with the failings of the weak, to make allowances for them and to shelter them a little bit. We also have a responsibility to guide them, to help them become stronger. And, one of the reasons that God is telling them not to have alcohol when they're going to serve in the tabernacle, I think the context shows this. It doesn't say it explicitly, so I'm kind of reading between the lines here, is that alcohol impairs your judgment. And he's saying, you, the priests, are the people who are required to make a distinction between the holy and the profane, between the clean and unclean, and teach the people. And if your judgment is impaired when you are serving as priest, you are not going to have a clear mind about how to be an example for these things, let alone to teach them. And so those who are more mature, I'm not saying that the more mature are like Levitical priests in that they're mediators for the people who are less mature, but they are in that role as teachers, and especially as exemplars. And so we do have a responsibility to help people move from that weak state to a strong state. We just can't force them to do it.
Ezekiel 3:16-21, right?
Right.
At the end of 7 days, the word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, I have made you a watchman for the house of Israel. So hear the word I speak and give them warning from me. When I say to a wicked man, you will surely die, and you do not warn him or speak out to dissuade him from his evil ways in order to save his life, that wicked man will die for his sin, and I will hold you accountable for his blood. But if you do warn the wicked man and he does not turn from his wickedness or from his evil ways, he will die for his sin, but you will have saved yourself. Again, when a righteous man turns from his righteousness and does evil, and I put a stumbling block before him, he will die. Since you did not warn him, he will die for his sin. The righteous things he did will not be remembered, and I will hold you accountable for his blood. But if you do warn the righteous man not to sin, and he does not sin, he will surely live because he took warning, and you will have saved yourself.
Good, thank you. And this shows that we do have a responsibility to those around us, that if we do know better, we have a responsibility to warn people away from things that are going to harm them. That doesn't mean that we need to correct everybody and make everybody be perfectly righteous on day one, but it does mean that we can't just let things slide, especially not forever. In Acts 15, the apostles, at the Jerusalem Council, the original conflict was this group of Jewish believers wanted to force all of the new Gentile believers to conform to all of the Jewish traditions, be circumcised, become a Jew in order to, be part of the Commonwealth of Israel. And the Jerusalem Council refuted this, said, we can't even keep all of these traditions. So how are we supposed to make anybody else do it? But then they went a step beyond that, not in relaxing or removing any of God's commandments, but in saying, here's the starting point. Get rid of these things that are associated with idolatry, yet the sexual immorality, the eating of blood. And then you can go to the synagogue and hear Moses taught from there. So in no case did they ever tolerate wickedness. They didn't tolerate sin. But what they did was say, we don't expect every sinner to become perfect. We expect people to learn over time and not to disregard God's commandments. But they have to learn from somebody. And the stronger in the faith, the people with greater understanding are the ones that they have to learn from. We're all supposed to be, we are all disciples, but we are all supposed to be discipling at the same time. Yeshua is the master of all of us. We are trying to become like him, and in trying to become like him, we make more disciples for him and teach them to become like him. But nobody's going to get there overnight. We have to make allowances for people over time. And as long as they're not in rebellion and they're not committing some flagrant sin because they just don't care what God's law says, then we can bear with them. Be gentle. There are some sins that are going to be worse than others, of course, and some of that's going to be culturally dependent. In the ancient Roman world, idolatry was a huge thing. Going to the pagan temple and making sacrifices and temple prostitution and all these kinds of things. We have our own versions of that. There are certain segments even of Christianity that are full of idolatry. But the big things in our culture, the things that are really hard for people to give up, are different. And, in today's culture, maybe it would just be sexual immorality in general, fornication and adultery, or, something like that. And maybe the disciples or the Jerusalem Council would have given a different starting point for people if they had been dealing with people today instead of in the Roman world of the first century. Ezekiel sounds like it's kind of a hard line. Like, you better warn these people or their blood is going to be on your head. And if you do warn them and then they screw up, the blood's on their head. And all of that is true. It sounds pretty harsh, and maybe it is, but there's a counterpoint here. So Timothy, if you wouldn't mind reading Genesis 33, 12 to 24. 12 to 14, sorry, not 24.
Then Esau said, let us take our journey, let us go, and I will go before you. But Jacob said to him, my Lord knows that the children are weak, and the flocks and herds which are nursing are with me. And if the men should drive them hard one day, all the flock will die. Please let my Lord go on before his servant. I will lead on slowly at a pace which the livestock that go before me and the children are able to endure until I come to my Lord in Seir.
Thank you. This sounds like Jacob is just making an excuse. He's trying to get out from underneath Esau, and that's true. He doesn't want to go with Esau because that's going to be bad for him and his house. And so he's making some excuses. But the excuse he uses is valid. I've got women and children and flocks, and some of my flocks have young, and I can't push everybody at the same speed. My servants and my sons and, some of the cattle or horses or whatever, they can keep up with you just fine. But these other ones can't. So we're all going to hang back and we're going to move in waves, kind of like they were before, and making sure that these weak ones are protected and that we're not pushing them too hard, harder than they can bear. If you're pushing the young cattle at the same speed you're pushing the older ones and the young ones are dying, well, then you're going to have problems with the older ones and you're just going to have problems all over the place. And the rabbis take kind of a life lesson out of this about families and leadership in general, is that you can only change people at a certain speed. You can only push them into a new ideology or worldview at a certain pace. The reason that this verse is relevant is because Jacob is going easy on the weaker members of his household and not pushing them faster than they can adapt to the changes that he's trying to move them into. Luke 23, verse 34. But Jesus was saying, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. And they cast lots, dividing up his garments among themselves. Everybody knows what's happening here. This is Yeshua on the cross. The Jewish religious leaders have conspired with the Romans to crucify him. He never harmed anybody. He harmed people's pride. He threatened people's power, but he never actually harmed anyone. And here they are killing him. Torturing him to death. And he's saying, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. So, although we have a responsibility to teach and to lead people in the right direction, which is what Yeshua did throughout his life, we also have a responsibility to be gentle and understanding with them, not to push them faster than they are capable of going,